Their patrol car was surrounded by a sea of flames, and the HOA cop was frantically screaming into his radio. I stood there, arms crossed, watching justice unfold. They had installed cameras on our private property at 3 a.m., threatened my family, and tried to steal our ranch. But my grandfather isn't someone who gets pushed around. He knows exactly how to beat a greedy HOA at their own game. Have you ever experienced an HOA abusing their power? Comment below letting me know where you're watching from, because this battle of wits is about to get extremely hot, literally. I never thought I'd end up back on my family's ranch. After losing my engineering job in Silicon Valley during the latest tech downturn, I found myself inheriting the public land, 24 acres of Texas hill country, that had been in my family for generations. The transition from coding in an air-conditioned office to fixing fences under the scorching Texas sun wasn't easy, but there was something deeply satisfying about working the land that belonged to my ancestors. My grandfather, Samuel Sam Walker, a retired firefighter, had been running the place since my father passed away 3 years ago. At 78, he was still as tough as nails and twice as sharp. The first few weeks were peaceful enough. I was learning the ropes, getting to know the local suppliers, and even making a little side income by leasing some of the land to hunters during season. Then the letters started coming. Violation notice, excessive vegetation growth, fire hazard, read the first one. It was from the Evergreen Estates Homeowners Association, the fancy development that bordered our property to the east. I laughed it off. Our ranch wasn't part of their jurisdiction. But then came more notices: improper waste disposal, unauthorized structures, aesthetic violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. I ignored them all, until the morning I found Grandpa Sam staring out the kitchen window, coffee cup gripped so tight I thought it might shatter. "Take a look," he said, pointing to a small black object attached to one of our oak trees along the fence line. It was a security camera, pointed directly at our barn, and it definitely hadn't been there the day before. "Those HOA vultures," Grandpa muttered, his weathered face turning a shade of red I'd rarely seen. "They pulled the same stunt on your grandmother years ago, harassing her about our livestock while I was away on firefighting duty, stressed her to no end. I promised her, on her deathbed, I wouldn't let them take an inch of our land." I checked our security feed from the night before, and sure enough, there was Gregory Walsh, the HOA's so-called security chief, sneaking onto our property with a ladder and tools. He was a former cop who'd been fired for abuse of power, now working for a private security company contracted by the HOA. The camera appeared to be just one of several he was installing, all under the guise of monitoring fire hazards during the drought season. But we both knew what this really was: surveillance and harassment. That afternoon, I met with an old friend from college, Olivia Bennett, who now worked as an environmental lawyer in town. Over coffee, she reviewed the notices and the security footage. "Logan, they're building a paper trail," she explained. "They're trying to document supposed violations so they can fine you into oblivion and eventually force you to sell." She pulled up a property development plan on her tablet. "See this? Evergreen Estates wants to expand. Their president, Gwendolyn Prescott, has been eyeing your land for years. They want to build a golf course and shopping complex." My blood ran cold when I saw the architectural renderings. They had already included our property in their plans, as if our selling was a foregone conclusion. That evening, I drove home to find a white SUV with Evergreen Estates security emblazoned on the side, parked just at our property line. No, actually 3 feet over it, on our land. Gregory Walsh sat inside, photographing our ranch house with a telephoto lens. Grandpa Sam was already outside, hammering a massive "Pamillo property, no trespassing" sign into the ground, the post deliberately positioned to block Gregory's view. "You're on private property," I called out to Gregory. "Move your vehicle now." He smirked and adjusted his mirrored sunglasses. "Just monitoring potential fire hazards, son. Public safety concern during this drought." He gestured to a walkie-talkie. "Don't make me call this in." Grandpa Sam stepped forward, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Call whoever you want. But according to the original property line survey from 1928, you're sitting 20 feet inside our boundary." Gregory's smirk faltered slightly, but he started his engine and backed up. Only to the fence line, not beyond it. As he drove away, I noticed Dorothy Thompson, our neighbor from down the road, watching from her porch. She hurried over once Gregory was gone. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "Gwendolyn's on a power trip. They raised our HOA fees again to pay for more security, and they're fining anyone who speaks out. She's got the city council in her pocket too." That night, as I pored over the property documents with Grandpa, our dog Ranger started barking frantically at the window. I rushed outside just in time to see a figure darting away from our barn. The security cameras caught it clearly. Gregory again, this time planting what looked like listening devices near our equipment shed. Grandpa Sam slammed his fist on the table when I showed him the footage. "Your grandmother warned me this would happen again. They tried this back in the 90s too." He pulled out an old leather-bound journal from a locked drawer. "These folks don't know who they're messing with. Logan, we're not just going to defend our land, we're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." As the journal fell open, I saw detailed property maps and legal notations in my grandmother's precise handwriting. "What exactly are you planning, Grandpa?" I asked. He smiled, a glint in his eye I hadn't seen before. "First thing I learned as a firefighter, you need to start a controlled burn." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Grandpa Sam on the phone with Frank Hudson, an old friend of his who used to be a police officer before retiring. "We need to get our ducks in a row," Grandpa was saying, his voice low and determined. "They're escalating and we need to be ready." After breakfast, Olivia came over with a stack of legal documents. We spread them across the kitchen table while Grandpa made coffee. "I've reviewed everything," she said, pushing her glasses up. "Your ranch is definitely not under HOA jurisdiction. The property was established decades before Evergreen Estates existed, and there's no legal mechanism for them to force you to comply with their regulations. They're counting on intimidation and your eventual exhaustion." She pulled out another document. "But there's something else that concerns me. Gwendolyn Prescott has close ties with William Thornton, the city council president. I found records of them trying to rezone this area for commercial development." As if on cue, Ranger started barking again. Through the window, I could see Gregory's security vehicle parked at our gate, blocking a delivery truck that was trying to reach us with feed for our horses. I grabbed my phone to record and headed outside. The delivery driver looked apologetic. "Sorry, Mr. Walker, this fella says I need some kind of environmental clearance to deliver to your property." Gregory stood with his arms crossed, enjoying the power trip. "New city ordinance," he lied smoothly. "All deliveries to agricultural properties in drought-prone areas need clearance from the Environmental Safety Office." I knew this was complete nonsense, but before I could argue, Gregory's hand moved to his hip, where I could see the outline of what looked like a gun holster. The implied threat hung in the air as he stared me down through his mirror's sunglasses. "You want to make this difficult?" he asked quietly. Just then, Grandpa Sam emerged from the house carrying what looked like an ancient survey map, yellowed with age. "Logan, call the actual police," he said calmly. "This man is trespassing and illegally impersonating a law enforcement officer." Gregory's face flushed with anger. "I'm authorized security, old man. I can have you arrested for interference." Grandpa didn't flinch. "You're standing 20 feet inside our property line, son. The actual boundary is marked by that old oak tree, not the fence line that was moved in the 1950s. And you're blocking a commercial delivery, which is illegal intimidation." He turned to the delivery driver. "Come on through, son. If he doesn't move, we'll just have the sheriff's department tow his vehicle." Gregory's face turned an even deeper shade of red as he got back in his SUV and reversed, allowing the truck to pass. But as he left, he called out, "This isn't over, Walkers, not by a long shot." Later that afternoon, Olivia and I attended a meeting of the Evergreen Estates HOA, where Gwendolyn Prescott was addressing the homeowners. She was a tall woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. "As many of you know, we've been dealing with a significant fire safety issue from the neighboring Walker property," she was saying, gesturing to a PowerPoint slide showing selectively unflattering photos of our ranch. "Their overgrown vegetation and improperly maintained equipment pose a serious risk to our community during this drought." I stood up from the back of the room. "That's completely false," I stated clearly. "Our property is maintained to county fire safety standards and we have all the proper permits. You have no jurisdiction over our land." The room went quiet as all eyes turned to me. Gwendolyn's smile hardened. "Mr. Walker, this is a private meeting." I held up the notice they'd posted at the local library. "It's a public meeting according to your own bylaws, especially when discussing matters affecting non-HOA property." Gwendolyn quickly changed tactics. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the kind of uncooperative attitude that endangers our community. While Mr. Walker argues about technicalities, our families could be at risk." Several homeowners nodded in agreement, but I noticed others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Dorothy Thompson stood up next to me. "Gwendolyn, the Walkers have maintained that ranch impeccably for decades. My family has lived next to them for 30 years without incident. This sudden concern seems more related to your development plans than actual safety. Gwendolyn's eyes flashed dangerously. Dorothy, I believe you still haven't addressed the citation for your non-compliant roof color. Perhaps focus on your own property matters. The threat was clear, and Dorothy sat down, though she gave me a supportive nod. As we left the meeting, several homeowners approached us quietly, expressing their own frustrations with the increasingly dictatorial HOA leadership. Back at the ranch, we found that Gregory had returned and parked his vehicle directly on our access road, making it nearly impossible to get in or out. He was nowhere to be seen, but his vehicle was definitely impeding access to our property. I called the sheriff's department, but while waiting for them to arrive, Grandpa Sam approached with a measuring tape and wooden stakes. He methodically measured from an old boundary marker, placing stakes in a straight line that clearly showed Gregory's vehicle was well within our property. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, Gregory reappeared, claiming we were harassing him by placing stakes around his legally parked vehicle. "Officer, I'm just monitoring the drought conditions as authorized by the city," he insisted. The deputy, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation, examined our evidence. Grandpa Sam produced the original property survey, signed and certified from the 1920s, along with our security footage showing Gregory's previous trespassing. The deputy finally turned to Gregory. "Sir, you need to move your vehicle. It's clearly on private property according to these documents." Gregory began to protest, but the deputy cut him off. "Move it now, or I'll have it towed at your expense." As Gregory started his engine, he glared at us through the window. "My boss isn't going to like this," he muttered, "and neither will the city council." As he drove away, Grandpa Sam turned to me with a determined expression. "He'll be back, with reinforcements. We need to call Frank. It's time to prepare our defense." That evening, as the sun set over the hills, turning the sky a fiery orange, Grandpa made a series of phone calls. I overheard fragments, something about burn permits, fire department protocols, and property easements. When he finally hung up, he spread a map of our property on the table and began marking specific areas with a red pen. "Logan," he said without looking up, "did you know that our property has special dispensation for controlled burns because of our location in a high fire risk zone? A privilege from my days as a firefighter." I studied his face, trying to understand where he was going with this. No, I didn't. He looked up at me, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Well, we do, and I think it's about time we exercised that right." The next morning, we received a certified letter from a law firm representing the Evergreen Estates HOA. They were suing us for maintaining a public hazard and demanding immediate compliance with their fire safety standards. I called Olivia right away, and she came over to review the documents. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "They're citing ordinances that don't apply to your property and making claims that wouldn't hold up in court, but they know that fighting this will cost you time and money." She looked up at me, her expression serious. "They're trying to wear you down, Logan." We drafted a formal response, demanding they cease harassment and threatening our own legal action for trespassing and intimidation. Meanwhile, Grandpa Sam was meeting with Frank Hudson in the barn, reviewing our security system. Frank, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement, helped install additional cameras, including special infrared ones that could detect movement at night. "Your grandfather asked me to look into Gregory Walsh's background," Frank told me when we took a break. "He was fired from the Ridgeview Police Department 3 years ago for evidence tampering and excessive force. Several complaints of harassment too, especially targeting property owners who were holding out against developers." He handed me a folder with newspaper clippings and court documents. And get this, William Thornton was on the police review board that could have pressed charges, but instead let Gregory walk away with just termination. No criminal record. I flipped through the documents, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "So they've worked together before?" Frank nodded grimly. "This is more than just an overzealous HOA. There's big money involved here. I did some digging on property records too. Gwendolyn Prescott has ties to Ridgeview Luxury Developments, the company that's lined up to build on any land the HOA acquires." That afternoon, I received a call from my bank. They were reviewing my mortgage due to concerns about property value following reports of fire hazards. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. When I pushed for details, the loan officer mentioned they'd received documentation from the city council about potential rezoning that might affect my property value. I hung up and found Grandpa Sam in the living room, looking out the window with his old binoculars. "They're turning up the heat," I told him, explaining about the bank call. He didn't seem surprised. "They're playing every angle, but so are we." He handed me the binoculars and pointed to a car parked on the public road near our property. Inside was a man with a camera with a long telephoto lens, photographing our ranch. Not Gregory this time, probably an independent inspector hired to document our supposed violations. That evening we attended a city council meeting where William Thornton was presiding. The agenda included a discussion of fire safety measures in drought-affected areas bordering residential developments. It didn't take a genius to figure out they were talking about our ranch. When it came time for public comments, I stood up and addressed the council. The targeting of our property is not about safety, I stated firmly. It's about forcing us to sell to developers. We have documentation of HOA officials trespassing on our land, installing illegal surveillance equipment, and harassing our suppliers. William Thornton cut me off mid-sentence. Mr. Walker, this is not a forum for personal grievances. If you have complaints about the HOA, take them up with the HOA. Several people in the audience murmured in disagreement. This was exactly the forum for such concerns. Before I could respond, Grandpa Sam stood up beside me, unfolding his property maps and documents. "I've lived in this county for over 50 years, he began, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. I served as a firefighter for 30 of those years, protecting the homes and businesses of everyone in this room. And I know when someone's using fire safety as an excuse for a land grab." He held up the official documents. "Our property has been independently certified as meeting all county fire safety requirements. We have the proper fire breaks, water access, and emergency protocols in place. What we don't have is any obligation to submit to HOA regulations for a development we aren't part of." William tried to interrupt, but Grandpa continued, raising his voice slightly. "People say, fire test gold. I use fire to test HOA laws." The audience erupted in a mixture of gasps and suppressed laughter. William banged his gavel repeatedly. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Walker." Grandpa Sam smiled calmly. "Not at all. Just a reminder that I know the fire codes better than anyone in this room, and I know when they're being misused." As we left the meeting, Gwendolyn Prescott intercepted us in the parking lot, flanked by Gregory Walsh. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my chest. "This property dispute can be settled easily. We're prepared to offer a very generous purchase price, well above market value." I stood my ground. "The ranch isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Her smile turned cold. "Everything has a price, Mr. Walker, and you'll find that holding out will become increasingly expensive." Gregory smirked behind her, his hand resting on his holster in what was clearly meant to be intimidating. "Accidents happen all the time on old ranches," he added, "especially during drought season." Grandpa Sam stepped between us. "Is that a threat, son? Because threatening a former fire chief about potential arson is a federal offense." Gregory's smirk faltered, and they walked away without another word. Back at the ranch, we discovered someone had been there while we were at the meeting. Our front gate had been spray-painted with the words, "Fire Hazard," in bright red. Ranger was barking frantically, leading us to discover a man in an official-looking uniform claiming to be from the Environmental Protection Department, attempting to access our storage shed. When confronted, he fumbled with his ID badge, which looked suspiciously fake. "I'm just conducting a routine inspection," he claimed. Frank, who had stayed behind to monitor the property, emerged from behind the barn. "Funny, I called the actual Environmental Protection Department earlier today. They have no inspections scheduled for this address." The man quickly retreated to his vehicle and sped away. I turned to Grandpa Sam, my patience finally breaking. "Maybe we should just sell and move somewhere else. This is getting dangerous, and they clearly have connections everywhere." Grandpa's expression hardened, disappointment evident in his eyes. "Is that what you think your father would do? Or your grandmother? She fought for this land until her last breath." The next morning, I woke up early, my grandfather's words still echoing in my mind. He was right. I'd been thinking of retreat when I should have been planning a counterattack. Over breakfast, I apologized for suggesting we sell the ranch. Grandpa Sam nodded, accepting my apology without comment, then spread out a detailed map of our property on the kitchen table. "There's something you need to know," he said, tracing his finger along the eastern boundary where our land met Evergreen Estate. "When I was still with the fire department, I secured a special permit for this property because of its location in a high fire risk zone. It allows us to conduct controlled burns as a fire prevention measure." He pulled out an official-looking document with county seals and signatures. "This permit is still valid, and it supersedes any HOA regulations or recent city ordinances." I studied the document, understanding beginning to dawn. "So we have the legal right to conduct controlled burns on our own property?" Grandpa nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Exactly. As long as we follow proper safety protocols and give appropriate notice to the fire department. Olivia arrived an hour later with more troubling news. I've been digging into Gwendolyn Prescott's background, she said, pulling out her laptop. She was involved in a real estate fraud case in her previous town. Nothing that stuck legally, but enough smoke to suggest fire. And here's the real bombshell. Ridgeview Luxury Developments, the company planning to build on any acquired land, has already pre-sold memberships to a golf club and spa that would be built partially on your property. She turned the screen so we could see the promotional materials. They're selling something they don't own yet. If they can't acquire your land, they'll be in breach of contract with some very wealthy clients. This explained the increasing pressure and the willingness to use intimidation tactics. They weren't just hoping we'd sell, they were desperately counting on it. Meanwhile, Frank had been monitoring our security cameras and discovered something equally disturbing. Gregory has been patrolling your property line 24/7, he reported. And look at this. He showed us footage of Gregory carelessly flicking cigarette butts into dry grass near our fence line, twice causing small fires that we'd had to extinguish. He's either incredibly reckless or deliberately trying to start a fire, Frank said grimly. If one of those sparks had caught properly, it could have spread to your barn in minutes in these drought conditions. Grandpa Sam's expression darkened, with tears. We need to act before this fool burns down the whole county. He began outlining his plan for a controlled burn. He would create fire breaks, monitor wind direction, and ensure all safety measures were in place. The burn would focus on clearing dry brush along our eastern boundary, coincidentally where Gregory liked to park his security vehicle on our property. I was still hesitant. Isn't this risky? What if something goes wrong? Grandpa shook his head. I spent 30 years fighting fires, Logan. I know how to control them better than anyone. And if we don't reduce this fuel load properly, we're actually at risk from people like Gregory who don't respect the danger. Olivia reviewed the legal aspects of the plan. Your permit is in order, she confirmed. As long as you notify the fire department 24 hours in advance and follow all safety protocols, you're within your rights. The HOA has absolutely no say in this matter. She paused, a small smile forming. And if Gregory happens to be trespassing on your property when you conduct a legal, properly notified, controlled burn, well, that's his problem, not yours. As the day progressed, we made preparations. Grandpa called the fire department to file the official notification for a controlled burn the following day. He carefully marked out fire breaks, calculated wind patterns, and prepared all the necessary safety equipment. I helped by clearing additional space around our structures and ensuring our water tanks were full. Frank continued monitoring our security cameras, keeping an eye on Gregory's movements and watching for any other potential trespassers. That evening, as the sun was setting, our security alert pinged. Gregory's security vehicle had pulled up to our eastern boundary and parked, as usual, several feet onto our property. Through the camera, we could see Gregory settling in for his night surveillance shift, reclining his seat and propping his feet on the dashboard. Within minutes, he appeared to be dozing off. Grandpa Sam watched the feed with growing interest. Well, well, he murmured. Looks like our friend is planning to spend the night. He checked the weather app on his phone. Winds from the west, humidity is low but not dangerous, and the temperature's dropping. Perfect conditions for a small, controlled burn. He looked at me, that mischievous glint back in his eyes. The notification to the fire department was for tomorrow, but regulations allow for a 24-hour window, depending on optimal conditions. What do you think, Logan? Should we move up our schedule? I glanced at the security feed again. Gregory was now fully asleep in his vehicle, right in the middle of the area marked for our controlled burn. The irony was almost too perfect. Still, I hesitated. Is it safe? What if he panics? Grandpa Sam nodded to Frank, who held up a fire department radio. I've already called my old colleagues to give them a heads up that we might start tonight instead of tomorrow. They're standing by, and I've marked out the burn area with proper fire breaks. Gregory's vehicle will be surrounded, but never in danger. Olivia had been reviewing the regulations one more time. It's completely legal, she confirmed. Your permit allows for flexibility and timing based on optimal conditions. I looked at the three of them, then back at the sleeping figure of the man who had been harassing us for weeks, carelessly endangering our property with his discarded cigarettes and threatening our livelihood. I nodded slowly. Let's do it. Grandpa Sam smiled, holding up a lighter to the security camera. This is the emergency switch for your legal memory. And the pre-dawn air was cool and still as Grandpa Sam, Frank, and I prepared for the controlled burn. We double-checked all safety measures. Fire breaks were in place, water tanks were positioned strategically, and we had proper fire-resistant gear. Through the security camera, we confirmed Gregory was still sound asleep in his vehicle, occasionally shifting position, but showing no signs of waking. The area we had selected for burning was a strip of land about 30 feet wide running along our eastern boundary, with Gregory's vehicle parked right in the middle of it. "Remember," Grandpa said as he handed me a drip torch, "we're following all protocols. This is a legitimate fire prevention measure to reduce fuel load during drought conditions." Frank nodded in agreement, his radio crackling as he confirmed our start time with the fire department. "They've got a truck on standby, but they don't anticipate any issues. Sam's burn plan is textbook perfect." We began at the downwind edge, carefully igniting small sections and working our way around. The dry grass caught quickly, sending up small plumes of smoke in the gray pre-dawn light. We worked methodically, always maintaining control, creating a horseshoe pattern that would eventually surround Gregory's vehicle while leaving him a clear exit path toward the public road. Olivia arrived just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, carrying a clipboard with all our permits and documentation. She surveyed our work with an approving nod. "Textbook-controlled burn," she commented. "And I've got the fire department inspection certificate from last month confirming your property meets all safety standards." The flames were low and controlled, consuming the dry undergrowth exactly as planned. We maintained careful watch, ready to intervene if anything unexpected happened, but Grandpa's decades of experience showed in the precision of the operation. As the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the property, we heard a startled shout from Gregory's vehicle. He had finally woken up to find himself surrounded by a carefully managed ring of fire, with only one clear path out. A path that would take him off our property and back onto public land where he belonged. Through binoculars, we could see his panicked expression as he fumbled for his phone, nearly dropping it in his haste. "Right on schedule," Grandpa Sam murmured, checking his watch. "Fire department should be pulling up in about 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, a red fire truck appeared on the main road, responding to both our prearranged notification and, undoubtedly, Gregory's frantic call. 2 firefighters approached us calmly, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Sam," the older one called out. "Nice clean burn you've got going. Mind if we check your permits?" While Grandpa and Olivia handled the paperwork, I kept an eye on Gregory. He was gesturing wildly on his phone, his face contorted with anger. Within minutes, a sleek black SUV came speeding down the road, pulling up behind the fire truck. Gwendolyn Prescott emerged, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, her face flushed with fury. She marched toward us, Gregory scrambling to follow after, hastily backing his vehicle out of the burn area. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill with rage. "You could have killed him. This is attempted murder." Olivia stepped forward, calmly handing over copies of our permits and notifications. "This is a legally permitted controlled burn on private property, Ms. Prescott. All proper authorities were notified, all safety protocols followed. Your employee was trespassing on private property during a legally sanctioned fire management operation." Gwendolyn snatched the papers, her eyes scanning them frantically for any flaw she could exploit. Finding none, she turned to the firefighters. "Are you going to do something? They deliberately set a fire around an occupied vehicle." The senior firefighter, who had been reviewing our documentation, looked up with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, the Walkers have all the proper permits for this burn. They notified us in advance as required by law. The fire is well controlled with appropriate safety measures in place." He glanced at Gregory. "If your employee was on their property without permission, that's a separate issue you might want to take up with the sheriff's department." Gregory stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "This was a deliberate act of intimidation. They knew I was there." Frank Hudson chose that moment to step forward, his old police badge visible on his belt. "Actually, we have security footage of you trespassing on private property and falling asleep while on duty. We also have multiple instances of you discarding lit cigarettes in dry grass, creating a genuine fire hazard. Would you like me to share that with the fire marshal?" Gregory's face paled, and his hand moved away from his weapon. Gwendolyn wasn't ready to concede defeat. "This isn't over, Walkers," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections in this town you can't imagine." Grandpa Sam, who had been calmly tending to the controlled fire, walked over to join us. His face was smudged with soot, but his eyes were clear and determined. "I've lived in this town for 50 years, young lady. I've pulled people from burning buildings, saved their homes, their businesses, their lives. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. People who think money and connections put them above the law. He gestured to the smoldering ground around us. Fire at the right place, right person, right time. The game's just beginning, Madam President. Gwendolyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. We'll see about that, old man. As she turned to leave, Gregory noticed Grandpa Sam's satisfied smile and drew his gun, pointing it at him. You think this is funny? He snarled. Before anyone could react, Ranger came bounding from behind the barn, barking furiously. He didn't attack Gregory, but the sudden movement startled him enough that he lost his footing on the muddy ground where we'd been spraying water as a safety measure. He went down hard, landing face first in a puddle of black soot and mud. His gun flew from his hand, landing several feet away where Frank quickly retrieved it. The firefighters, witnessing everything, immediately radioed for sheriff deputies. Brandishing a weapon during an emergency operation, the senior firefighter said grimly. That's a serious offense. As Gregory picked himself up, mud dripping from his once pristine uniform, Gwendolyn's fury seemed to reach new heights. You will pay for this, she hissed at us. All of you. Nobody defeats me in Ridgeview. Grandpa Sam watched them retreat, his expression serene. I've faced down 4 alarm fires in high-rise buildings with people trapped inside, he said quietly. You folks, just summer mosquitoes. Word of the controlled burns spread through Ridgeview like wildfire itself. The image of Gregory Walsh's security vehicle, surrounded by carefully managed flames, became the talk of the town, with several witnesses having captured video on their phones. Most versions included Gregory's subsequent mud bath courtesy of Ranger, adding a touch of humiliating comedy to the proceedings. While some residents of Evergreen Estates remained loyal to Gwendolyn, many others began to openly question her leadership and tactics. Dorothy Thompson organized a meeting of concerned homeowners in her living room, where people shared stories of excessive fines, selective enforcement of rules, and intimidation tactics. I attended at their invitation, along with Olivia, who explained their rights as HOA members. You can call for a special election, she told the gathered group. The bylaws allow for removal of board members if enough homeowners petition for it. But Gwendolyn wasn't going down without a fight. Through William Thornton, she pushed for an emergency vote by the city council to annex the area containing our ranch into the city limits, which would subject us to additional regulations and potentially eminent domain for community development. When we learned of this, Grandpa Sam reached out to his extensive network of friends and former colleagues throughout the county. Dozens of letters and calls flooded the council members' offices, and a petition against the annexation quickly gathered hundreds of signatures. Meanwhile, Frank discovered something troubling while monitoring our security system. They've hired a supposedly independent assessment company to declare your ranch a high fire risk area that requires city oversight, he reported, showing us documentation he'd obtained through old contacts. Olivia did some digging and found that the assessment company was owned by William Thornton's brother-in-law, a clear conflict of interest that we could use against them. The pressure from the HOA and city council was taking a toll on us financially as well. My bank account had been temporarily frozen due to what they called incomplete environmental disclosures, clearly another arm of Gwendolyn's octopus-like reach. Local suppliers were being pressured not to do business with us, and the hunters who leased our land for the season were being harassed when they arrived. Gregory, though somewhat subdued after the fire incident and facing possible charges for brandishing a weapon, had taken to impersonating actual police officers to intimidate people associated with us. But the community was beginning to rally around us. Neighbors offered to share supplies, local farmers brought hay for our horses, and a group of Evergreen Estates residents formed a Citizens for Fairness committee to challenge Gwendolyn's authority within the HOA. What had started as harassment against one family was evolving into a larger movement against corruption and abuse of power. The night before the crucial city council meeting where the annexation vote was scheduled, Grandpa Sam revealed that he'd been working with local reporters to investigate the connections between Gwendolyn, William, and Ridgeview luxury developments. I've been feeding information to an investigative journalist at the county paper, he explained, showing me a series of emails. They're preparing a major expose on the conflicts of interests and potential illegal activities. He pulled out my grandmother's old journal again, turning to a page I hadn't seen before. And there's one more card we haven't played yet. He pointed to a carefully drawn property map with notations in my grandmother's handwriting. According to these original boundary markers and surveys from 1920, 5 acres of what is now Evergreen Estates, including their clubhouse, actually belongs to our ranch. Your grandmother discovered this discrepancy years ago, but decided not to pursue it while she was ill. She left this for us to use if they ever came after our land again. The city council meeting was packed to capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. William Thornton called the meeting to order with obvious discomfort, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The annexation proposal was the first item on the agenda, and it was clear from the outset that William was trying to rush it through with minimal discussion. Due to urgent fire safety concerns, he began, the council proposes a boundary adjustment to bring the Walker property under city jurisdiction for proper oversight. Before he could continue, dozens of hands shot up from the audience. Reluctantly, he recognized Dorothy Thompson, who stood with a stack of documents. Mr. Thornton, I have here reports from 3 independent fire safety experts certifying that the Walker Ranch meets or exceeds all county regulations. I move that this proposal be tabled, pending further review. William tried to overrule her, but the crowd's murmurs grew so loud he was forced to allow a vote. To his evident shock, 2 council members sided with Dorothy, effectively stalling the proposal. As William frantically tried to regain control of the meeting, I noticed a woman with a press badge slipping into the room. She nodded subtly to Grandpa Sam, who stood up and approached the podium. Before we move to the next agenda item, he said firmly, I'd like to address some relevant information that bears on this matter. William tried to cut him off, banging his gavel. This is not the time for public comment. Grandpa Sam didn't budge. Actually, according to the city charter, citizens have the right to present relevant information before any vote affecting their property. He began distributing copies of the boundary documents and surveys to the council members. These certified historical records show that a significant portion of the Evergreen Estates development, including their clubhouse, was mistakenly built on land that legally belongs to the Walker family. The room erupted in shocked whispers and exclamations. The reporter stood up, raising her hand. Council President Thornton, would you care to comment on documents I've obtained showing that you were aware of this boundary dispute when you approved the original development permits? William's face drained of color as the reporter continued. I also have evidence of your financial ties to Ridgeview Luxury Developments, the company that would develop the Walker property if annexed. Can you explain this apparent conflict of interest? The meeting dissolved into chaos as reporters fired questions and audience members shouted demands for answers. In the confusion, I saw Gwendolyn Prescott slip out a side door. William hurriedly called for a recess and practically ran from the room. As people milled about discussing the bombshell revelations, Dorothy Thompson approached us with a broad smile. That was magnificent, she said, but Gwendolyn won't give up easily. She's already on her phone, probably calling in every favor she can. Her prediction proved accurate. As we left the building, Gwendolyn was waiting in the parking lot, her face a mask of cold fury. You've embarrassed me publicly, she hissed. That was a mistake. I won't stop until I get that land, whatever it takes. Grandpa Sam faced her calmly. I fought fires while bank robbers held guns to my head. You? Just summer mosquitoes. And I've still got 1 arrow left in my quiver. As we drove home, I felt a mixture of triumph and apprehension. We'd won the battle at the council meeting, but Gwendolyn's threat lingered in the air. What would her next move be? And what was Grandpa's final arrow? I didn't have to wait long for answers to both questions. The next morning, I received a call from our mortgage company. Mr. Walker, we're conducting a review of your loan due to concerns about property value following reports of environmental hazards, the representative said in a carefully neutral tone. I recognized the tactic immediately. Gwendolyn was going after our financing, using her connections in the banking industry to pressure us financially. When I told Grandpa about the call, he nodded grimly. Time for the final arrow, he said, reaching for his phone. Let's end this once and for all. The following evening, the Evergreen Estates clubhouse was filled to capacity for an emergency HOA meeting. Gwendolyn Prescott stood at the podium looking confident despite the recent setbacks. As many of you know, we've had some challenges with our expansion plans, she began, her voice smooth and practiced. But I'm pleased to announce that we've secured new financing for the Ridgeview Luxury Resorts project. Construction will begin next quarter, pending some final property acquisitions. She clicked to a slide showing architectural renderings of a sprawling golf course and shopping complex. This development will increase all of our property values by at least 30%, according to our analysts. The assembled homeowners murmured appreciatively at this promise, many seemingly willing to overlook the recent controversies in favor of potential financial gain. Gwendolyn's smile widened as she continued outlining the amenities and benefits that would come with the new development. She was just moving to a slide about membership tiers for the golf club when the double doors at the back of the room swung open. Grandpa Sam walked in first, followed by me, Olivia, Frank, and a group of about 20 Evergreen Estates residents led by Dorothy Thompson. Behind us came 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and the investigative reporter from the city council meeting. Gwendolyn's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered. "I'm afraid this is a private meeting for Evergreen Estates residents only," she said, her voice hardening. "Security, please escort our visitors out." But no one moved to remove us. Instead, Dorothy stepped forward. "As current HOA members, we've invited these guests to address matters directly affecting our community," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "According to our bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3, this is our right." Before Gwendolyn could object further, I stepped up to the podium, carrying a large mounted survey map and a stack of legal documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "what Ms. Prescott hasn't told you is that the land where we're standing right now legally belongs to the Walker family." I unrolled the boundary map, enlarged and clearly marked, hanging it beside Gwendolyn's development renderings. According to the original 1920 land surveys confirmed by 3 independent surveyors this week, 5 acres of Evergreen Estates, including this clubhouse, were mistakenly included in the development due to an error in boundary markers. A stunned silence fell over the room as I continued. "My grandmother discovered this discrepancy years ago and documented it in her journal, which has been authenticated by experts. She chose not to pursue the matter while she was ill, but left clear instructions for us to use this information if necessary to protect our ranch." Olivia stepped forward, distributing copies of the legal verification to the HOA board members. "This is preposterous," Gwendolyn sputtered, her composure cracking. "These documents could be forged. This is just a desperate attempt to block progress and keep Ridgeview stuck in the past." The investigative reporter moved to the front of the room, voice recorder in hand. "Ms. Prescott, would you care to comment on evidence that you and Council President Thornton were aware of this boundary dispute before the original development permits were issued? Or on documents showing you've already pre-sold memberships to a golf club that would be built partially on land you don't own?" Gwendolyn's face flushed with anger. "This is a witch hunt. I've done nothing but try to improve this community while the Walkers cling to their outdated way of life, blocking progress for everyone." In her fury, she made a critical mistake. "Of course I knew about the boundary issue. Everyone involved in the original development did. But after 50 years, possession is 9/10 of the law." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations as people realized she had just admitted to knowingly building on someone else's property. One of the sheriff's deputies stepped forward. "Miss Prescott, we'd like you to come down to the station to answer some questions about this matter." Meanwhile, William Thornton, who had been trying to slip out unnoticed, found his path blocked by Frank and the second deputy. "Mr. Thornton, we have some questions for you as well regarding potential ethics violations and conflicts of interest." As the two were led away, Gregory Walsh burst into the room, his face contorted with rage. "This is all a setup," he shouted, pointing at me and Grandpa Sam. "They've been planning this from the beginning." He reached for his holster but found it empty. He was still under investigation for the previous incident and had been temporarily relieved of his weapon. Before he could say anything more, Frank produced a small recording device. "Mr. Walsh, we have you on tape planning to plant illegal substances on the Walker property as a pretext for arrest. Would you like to explain that to these officers?" The meeting dissolved into chaos as HOA members demanded answers from the remaining board members, who sat frozen in their chairs, unwilling or unable to defend Gwendolyn's actions any longer. Dorothy Thompson seized the moment, calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership and the formation of an interim board until proper elections could be held. The motion passed overwhelmingly, with only a handful of Gwendolyn's closest allies voting against it. As the meeting concluded, people approached us with a mixture of apologies, congratulations, and questions about what would happen next. I assured them that we had no intention of evicting anyone or claiming their homes. We only wanted to establish the correct boundaries and ensure that our ranch would remain free from harassment and illegal development attempts. Dorothy, who was elected interim HOA president by acclamation, promised to work with us to find a fair resolution that respected everyone's property rights. In the aftermath, Gwendolyn and William both faced investigations for fraud, ethics violations, and abuse of power. Gregory was arrested for conspiracy to plant evidence and impersonating a police officer. The exposé in the county newspaper revealed the full extent of their scheme, including kickbacks from the development company and systematic intimidation of anyone who stood in their way. Our bank apologized for the misunderstanding about our mortgage and restored our account to good standing. Most importantly, we not only kept our ranch intact, but reclaimed the 5 acres that rightfully belonged to us according to the original surveys. After discussions with Dorothy and the new HOA board, we decided to use part of the reclaimed land to create a community park that would benefit both the ranch and the Evergreen Estates residents, turning what had been a source of conflict into a shared resource that brought the community together. 1 year later, at the grand opening of Walker Community Park, Dorothy gave a speech thanking our family for turning a potential legal battle into an opportunity for healing and cooperation. The Walkers could have demanded that we tear down our clubhouse and several homes, she told the assembled crowd. Instead, they chose to work with us to find a solution that benefits everyone. That's the true meaning of community. As children played on the new playground equipment and families gathered for a picnic on the green space that now served as a buffer between our properties, I watched Grandpa Sam tossing a ball for Ranger near the small pond we'd built as part of the park design. He caught me looking and walked over, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said, patting my shoulder. "She always said that sometimes, to protect what's yours, you have to be willing to burn a little underbrush. Makes room for new growth." As I watched the former adversaries from Evergreen Estates chatting amicably with our longtime friends and neighbors, I realized he was right. The fire that had surrounded Gregory's vehicle that morning had done far more than just teach the HOA a lesson. It had cleared away the old tensions and rivalries, making space for something new and better to grow in their place. "Sometimes," Grandpa Sam said, watching the children play, "a small fire can prevent a bigger one. That's the first thing I learned as a firefighter. And the law is meant to protect people, not to be a weapon for those who abuse power." I nodded, grateful for his wisdom and determination. Without his knowledge of fire management and boundary laws, without his willingness to stand firm when I was ready to give up, we might have lost everything. Instead, we had not only preserved our heritage, but helped forge a stronger community in the process. As the sun set over the hills, turning the sky the same fiery orange as the controlled burn that had started it all, I realized that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't a lawsuit or a confrontation. It's simply knowing your rights and having the courage to stand your ground when others try to take what's rightfully yours.
BD Stories, turning everyday madness into entertainment gold. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Drama like this doesn't wait.